The security footage was grainy. Timestamp 11:43 p.m. A janitor as a server room, a door that should have been locked to him. 7 times in 3 weeks. Same man, same quiet, same hands moving with a precision that had no business belonging to someone on a cleaning crew. The CEO watched the footage alone, replayed it, leaned closer. Something was wrong with him, with everything she thought she knew. She made the call. Full surveillance. No termination, not yet. She needed to know who he was working for first. 48 hours later, she was parked outside a building in a neighborhood she had never had reason to visit. And through a window, she saw something that stopped her completely. The man from the footage was standing at a whiteboard. Teaching in the look on his face was of someone who had once been extraordinary and had never stopped. There are buildings that forget who built them. Nexus Technologies was one of them. 42 floors of glass and ambition, sitting in the heart of Atlanta's tech corridor like it had always been there. Like it had grown from the ground on its own. Like no one had ever stayed up through the night, arguing over architecture diagrams and stress tests, and the kind of decisions that either save a product or kill it before it breathes. The building had a memory problem. Most buildings do. 47 p.m. The clinker moved through the corridor on the 31st floor with the quiet efficiency that belonged there. Rubber wheels of concrete, the low hum of ventilation, a half-empty bottle of soda's citrus solution catching the overhead light, and behind the cart, Marcus Webb, 42 years old, 6 feet, shoulders that had once held the tension of product launches and board presentations, carrying something heavier. The particular weight of a man who has learned to make himself small in spaces he once commanded. His hands were something else. Careful hands. Deliberate. The kind of hands that don't knock things over. That measures distance before they reach. That is exactly how much pressure is too much. He moved past a row of developer workstations. Monitors still glowing. Code still running. Someone had left a terminal open mid-session, an error log scrolling in red. Marcus stopped just for a second. Had eyes across the screen. Passed. Practiced. The way you read something you already understand before your brain catches up with what your eyes are doing. He saw the problem. He saw it the way you see your own name in a crowd. Without trying, his hand moved toward a keyboard, stopped, dropped back to his side. Achaf adjusted the monitor angle slightly, purely for Archie so it wouldn't overheat and up from test, then pushed his cart forward and kept moving. Nothing happened and us, no one saw. That was the point. 4 years. 4 years of this corridor, this cart, this specific brand of invisible. Marcus Webb had learned invisibility the hard way. Not the comfortable kind, where you simply go unnoticed because you're unremarkable. The kind that's chosen for you. Assigned, stamped on your file and followed you from one job application to the next until you stopped applying to the ones that matched what you actually knew how to do. He'd been invisible at empirical software too, in the end. But that was a different kind of story. The 31st floor cleared out by midnight. Most nights. Tonight, what Paulus still had light seeping under the door. The corner office. The one with the view of Centennial Olympic Park that nobody on the cleaning staff ever paused to appreciate, because pausing was not something the corner office encouraged in the people who maintained it. Marcus knocked twice. Soft, professional. No answer. He opened the door 6 inches, just enough to confirm empty. Which it was. Carter had left her coffee cup on the desk again. Half full. Still faintly warm. Her jacket hung over the back of her chair at an angle that suggested she'd planned on coming back tonight, and then changed her mind at some point between the elevator and the parking garage. Marcus cleaned around the desk.
Now done.
On it. Never a line was.
He knew where all line was.
Marcus Webb arrived at Nexus Technology Services. The HR coordinator who processed paperwork had looked at his resume with the lifelike confusion of someone reading a menu in a language they almost speak. Previous employment, various, education, listed but vague, references. Available upon request, which is the professional equivalent of please don't look too closely. She'd stamped his form, handed him his badge, and moved on to the next file. Marcus clipped the badge to his uniform, walked to his station, started work. And somewhere in the back of his mind, and the pod still ran on old software, he thought, okay, this is the shape of things now. This is what comes after everything else. Okay. He had a daughter to get home to, Zoe Webb, 8 years old, opinionated about breakfast. deeply committed to her hypothesis that purple was a personality, not just a color. Currently asleep in their apartment 20 minutes from here, watched over by their neighbor Mrs. Ade Zose, who was 71 and watched competition cooking shows at full volume and called Zoe my little engineer because as a Zoe for control for the toothpick and focused determination. Zoe asked times in the way that 8-year-olds ask things sideways while eating cereal, not looking up. Daddy, how come the people at your work don't know you're smart? And Marcus would pour his coffee. Take his time. Because I haven't needed them to know yet, baby. Zoe would consider this. As though it made complete sense. As though it was a strategy, not a wound. Kids are extraordinary that way. They take what you give them and build something hopeful out of it. Dominique Carter arrived at 6:52 a.m., 8 minutes before her assistant, 40 minutes before her first scheduled call. This was not unusual. This was, in fact, Tuesday. She moved through the lobby with the specific velocity of a woman who has calculated exactly how much she can afford to waste in any given space. And the lobby of Nexus Technologies did not make the cut. 35 years old, CEO 6 months in, Harvard MBA, a reputation that preceded her into rooms like weather precedes a storm. You felt coming before she arrived. Not because she was loud. The opposite. Because the air changed. Precise green eyes that filed things away the moment they saw them. A wardrobe that communicated a message on her behalf so she didn't have to say it out loud. Don't mistake efficiency for coldness. But don't mistake warmth for softness either. She'd been both. She'd been burned for being both. Her ex-husband was in Buckhead now. Renovated townhouse, Newell friend. Putting a dress that Dominique had never once looked up. Because she was not interested in information that didn't serve her forward motion. She had a son, Jordan, 10 years old. He ate at dinner alone on Tuesdays and Thursdays because Tuesdays and Thursdays were non-negotiable calendar realities. She told herself he understood. She told herself that a lot of things. Derek Okafor had been head of security at Nexus for 3 years. He was precise, thorough, and congenitally incapable of leading with good news. Which is why he knocked on Dominique's office door at 9:50 on a Tuesday morning. She already knew before he sat down that something was wrong.
We have a situation, he said.
Devon never said we have a situation unless it was genuinely a situation. He set at a tablet on a desk.
Pulled up the security footage. Pressed play. That time read 11s and I thought
3 p.m. 3 weeks ago. Marcus Webb. The cleaning cart parked outside the server room. Then Marcus Webb entering the server room with his key card, which he had been issued for routine maintenance access. Max Langston could die to life symbiotic. Pockets slightly fuller than before. Something small and rectangular pressed against the fabric of his uniform pants. Swiped. Another clip. Different night. Marcus at a senior developer's workstation. Briefly. Fingers moving across the keyboard with a fluency that did not look like accidental contact. Another clip. Marcus near the CFFO's terminal. Not touching, but looking. Reading the screen with the kind of focus that had nothing to do with adjusting a monitor. 3 weeks of footage. 7 separate incidents. Dominique watched all of it without speaking. Then she looked up. What do we know about him? The particular shrug of a man who about to say something not satisfied. Forward to employee, night shift maintenance, perfect attendance. Emergency fast contact, listen kind of Mrs. Ade's OCC, not a family member, seems to be a neighbor. Single father, 1 daughter. Minimum wage plus standard benefits package. He paused. No complaints on file. Cleaning staff seems to like him. Dominique looked at the frozen image on the screen. Marcus mid-motion, exiting the server room. We have a product launch in 3 weeks, she said. Flagship release. Hospital systems software. If any of our proprietary architecture gets so before that launch, I know. Do we have enough to terminate? Devon considered. We have enough to suspend pending investigation. Dominique was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of indecision. The quiet of calculation. Because something was as knocking. And Dominique's Carter's instincts had saved her notice that she had learned to respect them even when she couldn't name what they were telling her yet. A man who wanted to steal data would not do it over 7 nights of footage. A man who had been there for a few hours would know exactly where the kind of spots were. And a man who was selling Nexus secrets to a competitor would not show up every single morning with perfect attendance, take the worst shifts without complaint, and write birthday notes to the cafeteria staff. None of that added up. But then none of it added up the other way either. Don't touch him yet, she said finally. I want to devil what he's actually doing first. Devon nodded. She looked at him directly, discreet. For 3 more nights, Dominique watched footage, and the more she watched, the less she understood. Marcus Webb was methodical. That was the word. Every movement had a logic to it. He wasn't frantic, wasn't furtive in the way of someone doing something wrong. He had the calm of someone doing something they had done before, something they knew how to do, which was what bothered her. Because calm was either confidence or innocence, and she didn't know which one this one was. 47 p.m. Dominique was still at her desk when she made the decision. Impulsive, which she was not generally, which was actually what alarmed her. Because when Dominique Carter did something impulsive, it usually meant her instincts had outrun her reasoning and were trying to communicate something urgent. She changed into the gym clothes she kept in her office closet, pulled her hair back, took the elevator to the parking garage, not the lobby. She told Devon nothing. Yeah, because Devon would have tried to talk her out of it, and he would have been professionally correct to do so, and she would have had to listen, and tonight she did not want to listen. She sat in her car on level 2 and waited. Marcus came out at 10:02 p.m. Exactly. She gave him 30 seconds of lead. Then followed the Honda Civic, which was the 2008 model. Silver, or it had been once, before Anafalas and Atlanta had negotiated into something more accurately described as tired. It moved confidently through the light traffic on Peachtree, not rushing, not checking mirrors excessively, which either meant he wasn't paranoid, or he was too good to show it. Dominique kept 3 cars between them, turned when he turned, slowed when he slowed. She expected a hotel, a parking garage handoff, a contact, something that would explain the footage and the USB and the server room and all of it. What she got instead was Southside. The neighborhood announced itself gradually. Glass and chrome giving way to brick, condos giving way to shotgun houses, the particular grammar of a neighborhood that has been told for a long time that it is not the kind of place things happen to, the kind of place things happen from, the kind of place you're from. Past tense. Marcus parked on a street called Holloway, reached into his trunk and retrieved a warm backpack that looked like it had survived at least 1 decade and didn't intend to stop. He walked toward a building on the corner. Dominique saw the sign as she pulled over across the street. Southside Community Resource Center. Fayette Pest. 1 light above the door flickering. The kind of building held together as much by collective will as structural integrity. She sat in her car for 6 minutes. Because she needed to think. Because what she was seeing didn't match the picture she'd built. She got out and walked toward the light. The window was low enough. She didn't need to go inside. She just needed to see. And what she saw through that window stopped her completely. Marcus Webb was standing in front of a whiteboard. No cleaning cart, no uniform. He'd changed at some point, a plain gray shirt, jeans, old sneakers. But that wasn't the thing. The thing was how he stood. Not small, not careful, not invisible. He stood the way someone stands in a room that belongs to them. Shoulders back, voice carrying. Both hands moving as he talked, sketching connections on the whiteboard, drawing architecture that Dominique recognized. Because she'd seen that architecture in textbooks, in advanced coursework, in the documentation that Nexus had paid $40 million to acquire 5 years ago, and the people watching him. 15 young people, 36 teachers, some early 20s, notebooks open, laptops running, fear fast, leaning forward, asking questions whether I was going to be called on because they were too locked in to remember manners. On the front row, maybe 70 and in the air. Mr. Webb, could we apply the same framework to a database query optimization problem? Marcus turned to her, and he smiled. That the kind of muscle that isn't performed, that just happens. That's exactly where I was going, Amara. Write that question down. Because that's the question that's going to matter when you're in your first technical interview. Amara wrote it down. Dominique stood in the parking lot Southside Community Resource Center at 10:31 p.m. on a Friday night. And she did not know what to do with what she was seeing. Because of this was not what corporate espionage looked like. This was not what she had prepared to find. And she'd prepared to find everything. She moved to a different angle, kept watching. An older section of the building. Through another window, younger children that watching each to me 8 months, 10 or 7 years old. He used to see some from Marcus's hands, a laptop. Small, scratched, old, but running, powered, alive. A boy, maybe 9, in a red hoodie that was slightly too big, clutching the laptop to his chest like it was the most important thing he'd ever been handed. Which it probably was. Marcus said something to him, too quiet for Dominique to hear. The boy looked up and nodded very seriously, then opened the laptop and started typing with 2 fingers, concentrating like he was diffusing something. Dominique stepped back. She nearly walked into Marcus' web. He was right there, behind her, 1 arm's length, having come around from the side entrance without making a sound. Just standing there, holding an empty plastic custom and looking at her with an expression that was not surprise, which somehow made it worse. Dominique's heart did something embarrassing. She recovered in approximately 1 second. She was very good at recovering. I was in the area, she said, dropping something off. She gestured vaguely toward the building. Even as she said it, she knew it was the worst cover story she had ever produced in 35 years of life. She wasn't carrying anything. She was dressed in gym clothes. It was almost 11 at night. Marcus looked at her for a moment, then at the empty stretch of sidewalk, then back at her. He didn't call it out, which was somehow worse than if he had.
The center always appreciates support,
Someone in some seat. There was something in that, something careful and precise. The way he said someone in your position, not accusatory, not flattering, just accurate. The program you're running, Dominique said. Who are you qualified to? She stopped, because she heard it coming out of her mouth and she knew exactly how it sounded. Who are you qualified? As if the question made any sense? As if she had just watched him teach advanced systems architecture to a room full of kids who were eating it up like they'd been hungry for it their whole lives. Something crossed Mark Webb's face. Fast. Here and then gone. Not anger. Something more contained than anger. Good night, Miss Carter. He walked back inside. The door closed, not slammed, not even firm. Just. Dominique stood on the sidewalk for a moment longer than she would have liked. She was back in her office by midnight. Her assistant, Maya, was mercifully not present with her, sitting at her desk at 12 feet, about 15 in gym clothes, which requires left for best check on a night shift janitor. Everything available, she said on the voicemail. Employment history, education, legal, financial, all of it. I need it on my desk by morning. She sat back, looked at the Atlanta skyline through the glass. Something doesn't add up, she thought, and when something doesn't add up, it means you're missing a number. The file arrived at 7:24 a.m., 41 pages.
And I had printed it, which doesn't know to which, for the first briefly from the responded instant events, some things to hold events.
Dominique made but coffee first, strong, no sugar, then sat down and opened the file. She read the first page, then read it again, then set her coffee cup down very carefully on its closer, because her hands had done something unexpected. They'd gone slightly unsteady. Marcus Jerome Webb. Not just Marcus Webb, night shift maintenance, 4-year employee, unremarkable file, no college listed. What about systems Webb?
Systems architect? Emerson Software, 2014 to 2019. Emerson Software.
Company whose core technology Nexus had acquired. The framework that Nexus had built their entire flagship product line on top of. The architecture that was right now, 3 weeks from launching hospital systems across the southeastern teams. Marcus Webb hadn't just worked at Empirical. He'd helped build the thing, the patents on file, 4 of them, 2 primary, 2 contributing, all dated between 2015 and 2018, all bearing his name among others. Dominique turned his employment record. Senior assistant architect, promoted from mid-level in 18 months. Performance reviews that used words like exceptional and rare, and the kind of technical intuition you either have or you don't. March 29th. Official reason, restructuring. Dominique had been in business long enough to know that restructuring was what you wrote when the real reason was something you didn't want in writing. She kept reading. The lawsuit was 3 pages on its own. Marcus Jerome Webb versus Empirical authoring and Raymond Aldridge as CEO. Filed April 2019. Wrongful termination. Retaliation against the protected whistleblower activity. Dominique read slowly, because the details were the kind of thing you needed to read slowly. Marcus had discovered a critical flaw in a module of Empirical's medical software, a medical management system sold to hospital networks. The flaw affected dosage calculations under specific conditions. High-stress system loads, multiple simultaneous inputs, exactly the conditions you'd see in a busy hospital. He'd reported it internally. Documentation, with proposed solutions, with a timeline for correction that would delay the product launch by 6 weeks. Raymond Aldridge had responded by extending the launch deadline up to 6 instead of 6, telling the engineering team the issue was within acceptable parameters. And then when Marcus escalated to the board, terminating his employment within 72 hours, Marcus had filed suit. He'd won. Modest settlement. Confidentiality clause on specifics, though not on the fact of the settlement itself. He'd also won the right to never work in the tar industry again, in practical terms, because Raymond Aldridge, in the months that followed, had made it his particular objective to ensure that what Marcus Webb's name meant something specific in every hiring room in the sector. Litigious, difficult. The professional equivalent of a door that had been locked and the key thrown away. Dominique turned to the last section of the file. Personal history. She almost didn't read it.
Webb, what they call marriage for life to two wellness down there was one size one man choosing breast cancer stage. So 6 months after Marcus lost his job.
Did aggressively, unsuccessfully. She was 36. Zoe Webb had been 3 years old. Dominique closed the file, sat with it. Outside her window, Atlanta was doing what Atlanta did in the morning. Moving, building, generating. The skyline that Nexus was part of, had always been part of, doing what skylines do, which is stand there and look permanent and not think too hard about what's standing on. She thought about Marcus at that whiteboard last night. The way he said that's the question that's going to matter. She thought about the boy in the red hoodie holding the laptop like treasure. She thought the footage, the USB, the server room, the small rectangular shape in his pocket at 12:23 a.m. Refurbished equipment that Nexus was going to throw away, that would have gone into a recycling bin or an e-waste facility. That meant nothing to the balance sheet and everything to a 9-year-old in South who had never had a computer of his own. That was what he'd been taking. Not data, not architecture, not the company's intellectual property. The things the company had already decided had no value. To Issa Winter, the building did not remind her of anything in particular. Buildings rarely do until they do. 42 floors, flagship address, listed on the NASDAQ. Built, really, foundationally, conceptually, on the work of a man who was currently in a parking lot 20 minutes away, loading a cleaning cart into a service elevator to begin his shift. A man who had tried to protect hospital patients and been destroyed for it. Who's to lost his wife in the worst possible year. Who can't rebuild himself something small enough to survive. And who was spending his lilacs and sex to ensure that the next generation of kids from Southside would not have to do the same. Dominique Carter stood at her window, and she felt something she had been carefully not feeling for a long time. Not pity, not guilt. Something more uncomfortable than both. The specific sensation of a worldview beginning to crack. Not dramatically, not all at once. Just a fracture. A line appearing where you thought the surface was solid. The recognition that you've been looking at something for a long time and not actually seeing it. And now you are seeing it. And now you cannot unsee it. She went back to her desk, opened calendar, stared at it for a moment, then very quietly said to the empty room, "How many Marcus Webbs are in this building?" Which was his own kind of assassin. At that morning, passing through the lobby, Dominique saw Marcus for the first time as something other than a name of a footage assistant. He was talking to one of the cafeteria staff. Short conversation. A handwritten card changed hands. The cafeteria worker, a woman in her 50s, laughed at something, put the card in her apron pocket like she was keeping it safe. Marcus moved on. Just kept moving through the lobby. Cart, supplies, practiced efficiency, invisible as his own desires, and she knew how to suit. Not because no one had given him a choice. Because invisibility was the only professional option a blacklist whistleblower with a daughter to feed and a grief to suicide from fifth to find. And he had taken it, and he had kept going. Some men fall and make noise. They break things on the way down. They demand that the world acknowledge what was done to them. They fight, or they collapse, or they find someone to blame and direct everything toward the blame. Marcus Webb fell and went quiet. So quiet that 4 years had passed in this building without a single person thinking to wonder why a man handled his circuit boards like they were made of language. Who organized server cables with the care of someone who understood what they carried. who could read a scrolling error log at 11 at night and identify the problem in 4 seconds, was pushing cleaning cart for minimum wage. Nobody asked, and he never told, because he had a daughter who needed breakfast in the morning, and a community center that needed him on Friday nights, and a grief that had no forwarding address, and enough quiet dignity left over after everything to decide that the work was worth doing whether anyone saw it or not, especially when no one saw it. In the 41st floor office, Dominique Hutter closed the file on her desk. She did not yet know what she was going to do. She did know that doing nothing was no longer an option. She knew something else. The building had a memory problem, and she was going to have to be the one to fix it. Dominique went to Southside on a Tuesday morning. No Devon, no assistant, no calendar entry, just her car, the file, and the particular feeling of someone who has spent 35 years making decisions from data and is now being forced to make one from something else entirely, something less comfortable, something that doesn't fit neatly into a quarterly report. She wore the wrong shoes for the neighborhood.
She knows zeals and find rights, the specific miscalculation of a woman who had not planned to feel out of place and was now feeling extremely out of place and was not going to let that show.
She rang the bell. Gloria Beaumont answered, 65 years old, silver locks pinned up, reading glasses pushed at the top of her head like a crown she'd forgotten about. The kind of woman who looks at you for exactly 1 second and files everything away permanently. Miss Carter, she said. I wondered when you'd come. It was an interesting thing to say. Dominique stepped inside. The center in daylight was different from the center at night. At night, through a window, it had looked like something. A program, a classroom, an activity. In the morning, it looked like what it actually was. A building held together by stubbornness and love. Water stain on the ceiling tiles, old and mapped like a continent. Furniture that had lived 3 lives before arriving here. Whiteboards with ghost marks from equations that hadn't fully erased. A corkboard by the entrance covered in photos. Kids with laptops. Kids at desks. Kids holding certificates. Kids grinning at cameras with the particular grin of someone who has just figured something out and knows it. And in the corner of almost every photo, Marcus. Centered, not posed. Always slightly to the side or behind or kneeling down to a kid's level. Never performing for the camera, just present. Foss in front of that corkboard for longer than she intended. Gloria poured coffee without asking. They sat in the small office on the main hallway, stacks of grant applications on every surface, a dying plant that neither of them mentioned. The laptops Dominique started. He brings them in batches, Gloria said, every few weeks, refurbished, cleaned up, software installed. Whatever you'd give a kid who's never had one before, up on his knees learn fast. From Nexus, from what Nexus was going to throw away, Gloria's voice was precise. The distinction mattered to her. The man doesn't take anything that's been claimed. He takes what's been abandoned. Dominique thought about that. The USB drives, the server room, the things she'd watched on footage and built an entire theory around. An entire wrong theory. How long has he been running the program? 3 years, officially. He was doing in full sessions before that. Kitchen from table stuff, kids from the block, word spread, and he's never been paid for any of it. Gloria looked at her over her coffee cup. He's never asked. Dominique nodded, slowly, the way you nod when you're processing something that doesn't fit inside a category you already have. The kids, she said. How they doing? The ones who've been through the program. Gloria set her cup down. She took a breath, and she told her. Not all of it would land until later. Not all of it would matter to now later, but one detail stayed immediate and specific. 3 students in the project alone, in employment at technology companies, junior roles, entry level, but in doors that had never been opened for people who and grew up where they grew up and didn't have the connections that the industry ran on. He tells us something, Gloria said. First day of class, every time. New group comes in, he says it. Dominique, wait, he says, I'm not teaching you to code. I'm teaching you that you deserve to sit at that table. Oh, this code is just how you get there. The office was quiet for a moment. Outside, a bus went by. A kid on the sidewalk yelled something to another kid. Normal Tuesday morning sounds. Dominique said nothing. Because sometimes there is nothing to say. And sometimes the nothing is the most honest response available. She drove back to Nexus, slower than she normally drove, which Dominique Carter hauses to considerably above average speed. Emotionally, internally, Something was moving with unusual deliberateness. She was rearranging things. Not dramatically, not all at once, but the file she'd built on Marcus Webb in her head, the one labeled threat and managed accordingly, was being quietly restructured. Readable. File somewhere different. She was thinking about a man who had tried to protect her patients and lost everything, who had rebuilt himself at the bottom of an industry that had swallowed him, who came to work every night and did not explain, did not ask scenes differently, who spent his late nights building something with what other people had thrown away. And she was thinking about her son, Jordan, eating dinner alone on Tuesday nights. And the way she told herself he understood. She was thinking about a lot of things on that drive back, 3 weeks before the launch. Nexus was running at the particular frequency of an organization that knows that it is about to do something significant and is terrified of that significance in equal measure, being excited by it. Every floor buzzed. Every meeting ran over. The kitchen on 31 was perpetually out of coffee because the engineering team was consuming it at a rate that suggested they had abandoned sleep as a concept. Kwasman Sutson, the CISO, ran his daily stand-ups at 7 a.m. now instead of 9. He used words like locked in or solid on track with the delivery of someone who was gradually not thinking about what had happened if they weren't. Dominique moved through it all. Directing 47 decisions a day that required her specific judgment and no one else's. She was very good at this. She had always been very good at this. And somewhere between the board call and the investor briefing and the product Obama prep, she kept noticing Marcus in the hallways. The cart, the practiced efficiency, the downcast eyes that weren't actually downcast, that were, she now understood, observant, taking in everything. Once she watched him pause near the engineering war room. Through the glass, the team was arguing over a migration diagram on the main screen. Marcus looked at it for 3 seconds, then moved on. She thought. He saw it. Whatever it was, he saw it. Devon Okafor knocked on her office door on a Wednesday afternoon. He had his I need to tell you something face. Devon had several faces. This was not his best one. Aldridge, he said. Dominique went very still. Raymond Aldridge. He's been appointed to the Nexus Strategic Advisory Council. Bridges finalized it yesterday. Announced this one eternally. The name land had the way names land when they carry history with them. Raymond Aldridge, 60 years old. Former CEO of Empirical Software. Currently described in industry profiles as a senior technology executive and strategic advisor. A man who had built a second career on being the person who had run Empirical before it was acquired. Who wore that acquisition like an achievement rather than what it actually was. Which was a sale that happened partly because the company's reputation had been damaged from a lawsuit no one talked about directly. Who had 5 years ago fired Marcus Webb within 72 hours of Marcus trying to save patients from a software error. Who had then spent considerable energy ensuring Marcus could find on professional footing anywhere in the industry. That Raymond Aldridge, who was now, as of yesterday, sitting on the Nexus Advisory Council. Does he know Marcus works here? Dominique asked. Her voice was controlled, professionally controlled. The kind of controlled that takes practice. Devon hesitated, which was her answer. He asked about the maintenance staff roster in his first week of preliminary calls, as Sun said. Before the appointment was finalized, Dominique looked at the skyline, not the inspirational look, the calculating one. He didn't come here because of Nexus, she said. No, Devon agreed. I don't think he did. Marcus did not know. That was the thing that sat with Dominique for the next 4 days. Marcus was coming in every night, doing his work. Gonasasas on Fridays, picking up Zoe in the morning. Living the contained and purposeful life he built from the wreckage of the one he'd log-tossed. Not knowing that the man who had wrecked it was back. Not knowing he was in the building. Not knowing any of it. And Dominique couldn't tell him. Because she didn't yet know what she was going to do. And telling Marcus before she knew what she was doing felt like handing someone a warning with no shelter attached. Which was worse than silence. In some circumstances. She hated that she couldn't decide which circumstance this was. The call came on a Thursday night, 10:49 p.m. Kwame Sutton, who'd been locked at his and were solid 12 hours ago. We have a problem. Dominique was still at her desk. She was almost always still at her desk at 10:49 p.m. on a Thursday. Jordan was asleep. The housekeeper had let herself aside at 9. The apartment above hers was doing something rhythmic with what sounded like an answer to rearrangement. That's a problem, she said. Critical failure. Integration layer. Under stress testing, the system collapses at 50,000 concurrent users. We're building for hospital networks, Dominique. They'll hit that number in the first week. She closed her eyes, not in despair.
It's in the specific way of someone essentially recalculating every variable in a situation that just changed shape.
How long to fix it? Honest answer? Months. We'd need to rebuild from the foundation of the integration architecture. Nobody on my team has ever seen anything like this failure pattern. It's not in any documentation we have. It's like it's coming from somewhere deeper than the code we wrote. Somewhere deeper than the code we wrote. Dominique opened her eyes. She stood up, get everyone into the war room now. The war room at 11:30 p.m. looked like the inside of a very expensive headache. 8 engineers.
3 laptops open ceaselessly on the main table. Error logs scrolling on the big screen in red that seemed to pulse with accusation.
Cops in various stages of abandonment.
Someone had brought a whiteboard in from the hallway and covered it entirely in diagrams that were getting more desperate as the night went on.
Dominique stood at the head of the table. She let them go for 45 minutes. Every solution proposed was either too slow or too dangerous. Patch it and risk introducing new failures. Rebuild and lose the launch date. Push the launch and face the board.
She said the bulb off of investors.
Face the investors and face everything she had promised. Everything Nexus had promised. Every hospital administrator who had signed a contract on the expectation that this product would be ready. 3 weeks. And the clock was already ticking backward. She walked out, just for a moment. Just into the corridor where the air was slightly cooler and slightly quieter, and the failure on the screen inside wasn't scrolling directly into her face. The corridor was empty, except the cleaning cart was parked outside the war room window. Marcus stood beside it, not moving, looking through the glass at the whiteboard, at the error logs on the screen, at the diagram that Kwame had been arguing over for the last 20 minutes. It's not for long, 3 seconds, maybe 4, but his eyes moved across the screen with that same speed she'd noticed before. The same way a person reads something in a language that is native to them. Fast. Automatic. He saw it. Dominique didn't know what he saw, but she knew he saw something. He picked up his cart handles, move on, and she said his name. Marcus. He stopped, turned. An expression personally unreadable, and somehow also, underneath all of that, tired. The bone deep tired of a man who has been careful for a very long time. I need you to look at something. A pause. Not a long one, but real. Scott, I know who you are. She kept her voice low, even, know what you built. And although whatever is on that screen is something you recognize, I could see it. The hallway held them both for a moment. Kess looked at the war room door, at the error log still scrolling through the glass, at the team inside arguing in circles, getting nowhere fast. He looked back at her. May I see the full error logs, he said. Yes, and access to the diagnostic reports, yes.
And a beat. No one tells me how long I have. Dominique said you have as long as you need.
The room went quiet when he walked in. Not the polite quiet of introduction, the sharp quiet of genuine surprise. A engineer looking at a man in a Nexus maintenance uniform, walking to the screen with the particular focus of someone who has already started solving the problem before he's been formally invited to. Kwame Sutton stood up. Dominique, what? Sit down, Kwame. She said it gently. Now, Marcus stood in front of the screen, seeing him sweet Simon speak on him, seeing it not performing the act of reading, actually reading, process. They was voice smooth for social but visible if you were watching, which Dominique was. Small thing. A slight narrowing. A compression at the corner of his mouth that meant recognition. The almost imperceptible exhale of someone who has found what they were looking for. May I, he said, gesturing at the keyboard. Dominique nodded. He sat down and the room changed. It is a specific thing to watch someone who is genuinely exceptional at something do that thing. Not impressive in the performed sense. Not the confidence of someone who needs you to see how good they are. The other kind. The quiet kind. The kind where the work itself is so clearly the point that there's no room left for performance. Marcus moved through the error logs the way you move through a building you grew up in. No hesitation. No backtracking. Direct path from entrance to what he needed. 20 minutes. Then he straightened layer. Kwame started to say something. It's a memory allocation issue. In the core frame. Specifically in the load balancing protocol when concurrent user thresholds hit certain parameters. He pointed at the screen. Precise. One finger. Exact line. There. That's a start. Everything else you're seeing is a cascade from that single point. The room was very quiet. A junior engineer named Brianna leaned forward and looked at the line he was pointing to, then looked at Bobbard, back at the screen. "Oh," she said very softly. "Oh, it's a legacy issue," Marcus said, "from the original architecture. Something we compensated for in the early builds, and then the compensation got built over, and eventually we, he said we. And then he moved on, not drawing attention to it, not explaining it. But Dominique heard it. We. "Can it be fixed before the launch?" Kwame asked. His voice had a new quality, the particular quality of someone who can place him into a room with one assumption and is leaving with a different one. Marcus was quiet for a moment, not performing uncertainty, calculating. "Yes, but it's not a patch. It requires rebuilding the allocation sequence from the point of origin properly. With the right architecture." He paused. "I'll need 46 hours, full access to the code base. And I'll need your team to work with me, not around me." He looked at Kwame when he said last part. Kwame looked back. Something happened in that look. Dominique said, 46 hour. They are not dramatic in the way that stories make urgent things dramatic. No swelling music. No single breakthrough moment where someone stands up and announces that they've solved it. Just work. Long hours of specific, careful, hard work. The kind of work that requires everything you have and gives nothing back except the problem being solved. Marcus at the keyboard for stretches that should not have been physically possible. Brianna writing notes she kept reviewing.
Swan, somewhere the honesty is on Mark, puts the chair directly next to Marcus and staying there. Not supervising, learning.
There were moments, small ones. At 3 a.m. on the first night, when Marcus resealed the first clean section of the allocation sequence and ran the test and it held. Brianna said, "Oh my God," quietly. And the junior engineer next to her said, "Yeah." And nobody made a bigger deal of it than that because they had 32 more hours to go. At 7 a.m. when Marcus went to the bathroom and came back with 2 cups of coffee from the machine and handed one to Brianna, which she accepted without a word. Because by that point words were a resource they were conserving. At hour 38, when the system ran the load test and then held at 70,000 concurrent users, and the room made a sound that was exactly a shear and wasn't exactly a sigh, and was some third thing specific to people who have been holding their breath for a day and a half. And then Marcus kept going.
Because holding was not the goal. It was the floor. He restructured. Built the things in the way it should have been built originally.
When there had been time pressure and deadline pressure and the particular pressure of a CEO who made bad decisions for bad reasons. At hour 46, he stood up from the keyboard, rolled his shoulders. "Run the full test. The full test ran. 98,000 concurrent users. Stable. Efficient. He 1% higher performance than the original design target." Brianna put her face in her hands. Not upset. The opposite. Kwame looked at the results on the screen for a long time. Then he looked at Marcus. "I've been CTO for 4 years, he said. I've never seen anyone work like that." Marcus picked up his empty coffee cup, threw it in the bin. "Get some sleep, Mr. Sutton. You've got a launch in 3 days. He walked out. The launch happened on schedule. Atlanta on a Wednesday morning. The product going live across 11 hospital networks in 4 states. Every system running lean. Exactly at last. Particular satisfaction of a thing working the way it was supposed to work. Stock price up 12% by closing. Nathaniel Bridges sent a company-wide email with the subject line, "We did it." There was a celebration on 31. Someone brought cake. Someone else brought champagne at 4 p.m., which was controversial but unopposed. Engineers who had barely slept in 3 days stood around drinking from plastic cups and looking at each other with the relief of people who'd been genuinely uncertain about the outcome until the moment it became certain. Dominique moved through it, shook hands, said the right things, meant them. She looked for Marcus. He wasn't there. Of course he wasn't there. He'd gone back to his cart. She found him on 31 in the same corridor where she'd found him 3 nights ago, working in the sensing section of floor in the same direction, same practiced efficiency. She stopped. He glanced up. "You should be in there," she said. "On shift," he said. "Marcus Mascarta." His voice was even, not cold, just.
Settled they did good work in there, your team. They'll get better.
He paused.
They're worth developing. And he went back to what he was doing.
Raymond Aldridge appeared in the building 12 days after the launch. Not on the schedule Dominique had been sent. 3 days early, a Tuesday. A kind of arrival that is designed to catch people off guard. Which meant it was designed to catch a specific person off guard. Or to see something before accommodations could be made. Devon texted Dominique at 8:17 a.m. One line, Aldridge is here, already in with Bridges. Dominique set her phone down, picked it up again, put it in her bag and walked to the elevators. Raymond Aldridge was a tall man who had learned to use his height strategically. He carried 60 years in the precise way of someone who considers age an argument. Silver hair, cropped close. A suit that was good without being flashy. The choice of a man who understands that restraint signals more power than display. He was already sitting in Nathaniel Aldridge's office when Dominique arrived. Dominique. Stinist. Extent practiced warmth of someone who knows what warmth is supposed to look like. I've been hearing great things about the launch.
Raymond.
She shook his hand. I didn't see you on the calendar for today. I was in Atlanta anyway. Thought I'd stop by. He gestured at the chair beside him. I was actually just telling Nathaniel about a concern that came to my attention. Dominique sat. She kept her face neutral. Which is just something. A member of your maintenance staff, Aldridge said. Amamus? Losses came to my attention that he's been assessing some equipment for external personal activities. Removing devices from Nexus premises for what appears to be unauthorized use. He set a folder on Bridges' desk. I've put together a brief. The liability exposure here could be significant, particularly given the timing with the launch. Associations between product and unauthorized equipment use. The equipment he removed, Dominique said, was on the disposal list. Cleared for recycling. 0 book value. 0 inventory presence. Aldridge looked at her. A small recalibration behind his eyes that he controlled quickly. The Leifert definition of company property doesn't necessarily. I know what it doesn't necessarily, Raymond. She let that sit for exactly 1 second. I also know why you're in this building. The room shifted slightly. Bridges looked between them with the expression of someone who has realized he is present at something he was not invited to. I'm here as a strategic advisor. You're here because Marcus Webb is here. Her voice stayed level, and because Webb knows a bit empirical software is a problem for you. Aldridge's practiced warmth did not leave his face entirely, but it settled differently. Cool, more careful. That's quite an accusation. It's an observation. The documentation on the equipment removal doesn't support disciplinary action, and you know it. I'd appreciate you staying in the scope of your advisory role, Raymond. She picked up the folder. I'll keep this. She walked out. Behind her, Raymond Aldridge sat very still and thought. The article appeared online 4 days later. A technology industry newsletter, minor, moderately read. The kind of publication that runs on tip-offs and doesn't run too many follow-up questions. The headline read, Nexus Technologies employee under investigation for unauthorized use of company assets. No name. Not directly, but enough detail to identify the role, the department, the timing. Dominique read it at 6 a.m. on her phone, standing in her kitchen while Jordan ate cereal behind her. She read it twice, then put her phone in her pocket and finished making coffee. She was steady. She was also furious. But the fury was the clean kind, the kind that doesn't spray, the kind that consolidates into something useful. She needed to get to Marcus before he saw it. She did not get to Marcus before he saw it. He was on shift. 31st floor. Same corridor. But Marcus Webb's world had not rearranged itself around the drama occurring in it, which was its own kind of dignity. She rounded the corner and he was standing with his phone in one hand and his cart stopped in front of him. Looking at the screen with an expression she couldn't fully read, which was not new. Except this time it was different. This time, I feel the control. Underneath the practiced blankness, he looked tired. The specific tiredness that is not about sleep. Marcus. He looked up, put his phone in his pocket. I'm handling it, she said. I know you are. It's not going to Mrs. Carter. He picked up the cart handles. I've been here before. I know what this looks like. He wasn't looking at her. Looking at the corridor ahead of him. I know how it ends. Now this time. He looked at her then, and she needed him to believe her. And she could see that he wanted to. That's some part of him, the part that had not been completely extinguished by 5 years of careful survival, wanted to believe that this time was different. But wanting to believe and believing were not the same thing. And Marcus Webb had learned that lesson at a cost she could not fully comprehend. Get rest, she said quietly, and moved on. The envelope was on her desk the next morning. Plain white, her name on the outside, Ma handwriter. She knew it immediately. She had seen it on the birthday notes to the cafeteria staff. Careful and Cliff inside. One page, a resignation letter, effective immediately, professional, brief, if no grievances listed, no accusations. The kind of letter written by someone who has done this before and once knows that the version without anger travels further than the version with. And at the bottom, below the signature, one line in a slightly different pen, added after, as an afterthought, or maybe as the nosy thing he actually wanted to say. Some fights aren't worth having twice, Miss Carter. Thank you for the distance. Well, Benson, as he's sitting up, read it again. Set it on her desk. Stood at her window for exactly 30 seconds. Then she picked up her bag and her jacket and walked out of her office without her phone, without her calendar filed. So I must have called to her, Mr. Totter. What are you over 9 o'clock? And she said reschedule it and kept moving. She took the elevator down. Not to the lobby, to parking, because there was somewhere she needed it to be. And she was done. She was completely muddled of the version of this story where Marcus Webb made himself smaller to protect everyone around him from the discomfort of seeing him clearly, where he disappeared quietly because that's what the system expected of him, and he had spent 5 years accommodating what the system expected. She was done with that version, and she was going to go find him, and she was going to tell him. Not because she had a plan yet, but because this time, someone was going to fight for Marcus Webb before he had to fight for himself. Even if that someone had 2 weeks ago watched security footage of him and built a theory that was wrong in every direction that mattered. Maybe especially because of that. She drove to Southside, because where else would he be? Not his apartment. Not somewhere licking wounds, feeling sorry for himself. Not Marcus Webb. Marcus Webb would go to the place where the work was, because the work was what he had after everything. The work and Zoe and the kids just called him Mr. Webb and wrote down the questions he told them would matter. She was right. The lights were on in the community center. She could see him through the window before she got to the door. Not teaching. Not today. Just sitting in a classroom. Alone. On the kid-sized desks, which should have looked absurd and somehow didn't. One of the refurbished slop open in front of him. First, not looking at the screens. Just sitting. Dominique stood outside the door for a moment. She thought about a lot of things in that moment. She thought about her son eating dinner alone on Tuesday nights. She thought about the error log scrolling in red. She thought about the boy in the red hoodie. She thought about we, how Marcus had said we when he talked about the original architecture, and then kept moving like it wasn't anything, like it was just an accurate pronoun and not the entire story of his professional life sitting in one syllable. She doesn't look up. He looked up. He didn't look surprised. It was 8 p.m. on a weeknight. She had never been here except twice, once as a spy and once as a visitor. This was something else. He waited. She walked in, sat down in one of the other small chairs, which was also not designed for a person in it and the wrong shoes. Neither of them said anything for a moment. You're not supposed to be the one who left, she said fondly. Marcus looked at the laptop screen. I've already left once. I know what the signs look like. The signs are wrong this time, maybe. He closed the laptop. Or maybe the outcome is what changes and not the signs. Marcus. She leaned forward. I need you to listen to me from the 6 seconds. He looked at Aldridge is not going to win this deuce. Not this time. I have something he doesn't. What you have, the truth, and your record, and 46 hours of documented work that saved this company's most important product launch. She held his gaze. And I have a board meeting Friday morning where I plan to use all 3. He was quiet, and I need you not to be gone when Friday is over. Outside, a car went by on Holloway. A dog somewhere. The particular sounds of a neighborhood at 8 p.m. that is not vowed to be anything other than what it is. Marcus looked at her for a long time, not weighing her. Weighing something else. Something internal. The thing you weigh when someone is asking you to trust again, and the last time you trusted it cost you everything. I'll be here Friday, he said finally. I'm always here on Fridays. Dominique nodded. That song her, so sorry, come here. Stop. It's back to the door. Stop spouting and where's off. For what it's worth. Oh, sorry, for me this is long to look properly. She walked out. The door closed soft behind her. Marcus sat in the empty classroom for a while. Then he opened the laptop back up and went back to work. Because that was what he did. That was what he had always done. Even when everything else was uncertain, the work was there. reliable, waiting. The one thing that had never lied to him. He kept going, in the dark, like he always had. Friday came, well, always do. Quietly, without announcement, like it was just another day. Like the calendar had not been circled in red inside Dominique Carter's chest for the past 72 hours. She was at her desk by 6 a.m., which was early even for her. The file was open, everything she'd compiled on Marcus, everything Devon had pulled, everything the legal team had quietly verified at her request without being told exactly why. The patents, the timeline, the lawsuit documents, the settlement, the performance reviews from Empirical that used words like exceptional and rare. The 46 hours of documented work logged in Nexus's own system contractor access. And one more thing, a single page she'd written herself, at her kitchen table, at 11 p.m. the night before, while Jordan slept down the hall, while Atlanta went quiet outside the window. Not a legal document, not a strategy memo, just the truth. What happened? What was done to a man who told it? What that cost him? And what he built anyway? She'd written it by hand first, then typed it, then read it back to herself, out loud in an empty kitchen, to make sure every word landed the way she intended. She was ready. Approximately 70% ready. Running on the remaining 30% being manufactured in real time by something that wasn't quite courage and wasn't quite anger, and was probably both compressed into a third thing without a clean name. She closed the file, picked up her coffee, and waited for 8 a.m. The boardroom at Nexus was designed to communicate one thing above everything else. Darkwood that had been darkwood for 20 years. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a skyline that didn't move. Chairs that cost more than some people's monthly rent, ranged with the precision of a room that takes itself seriously and expects you to do the same. The cutting decisions says are final.
Wait, not be questioned in the elevator on the way back down.
Dominique walked in at 8:58 a.m. Raymond Aldridge was already there. Of course he was. Seated 2 spots from the head of the table, posture arranged. Reading something on his phone with the casual ease of a man who has been comfortable in rooms like this for 30 years, who has never once walked into a boardroom and wondered whether it was built for someone like him. Because it always was. Because he made sure of it. He looked up when she entered, nodded once. She nodded back, and took the head of the table. Nathaniel Bridges opened with standard language. The meeting had been convened to address personnel concerns raised by a member of the advisory council. The council took complaints matter seriously. CSEs existed for a reason. Dominique let him finish. Then she stood up, and she put the file on the table. Not slammed, not performed, just placed. With the specific care of someone who has been waiting to put this exact thing in this exact room and wants the weight of it to be felt before a single page is turned. Before we discuss Raymond's concerns about Marcus Webb, she said, I'd like to discuss Raymond. Aldridge's expression adjusted, barely. A fractional recalibration behind his eyes that he controlled in under a second. Specifically, she continued, I'd like to discuss March 2017. A medication management software module. A non-antigen defect and dosage calculation protocols under high system load. And the decision to launch anyway. The room went very still, Bridges said. Dominique, I have the lawsuit record, the settlement documentation, the timeline of Marcus Webb's internal reports, and the termination that followed them within 72 hours. So she marked the file, turned it so the table could see. I also have Marcus Webb's full technical record at Empirical. 4 patents, 2 primary contributions, both foundational to the architecture that Nexus acquired and built its entire flagship product line on. She looked at Aldridge directly. The man you came here to remove, she said, is the man who built what this company stands on. And 11 days ago, he saved our most important product launch. In 46 hours. Without sleeping, in a maintenance uniform. She placed the system logs beside the file, the performance metrics beside those. Quam Sutton's written assessment on top. I have everything documented. Aldridge leaned back slightly, not retreating, repositioning. This is a compelling narrative, he said. His voice was measured, the voice of a man who has survived boardrooms before. But narratives don't dress liability. The equipment removal alone has been reviewed by legal. Dominique nodded toward the corner of the room where Elaine Marsh, Nexus's head of legal, had been sitting very quietly for the past 4 minutes. Patient. Prepared, Elaine said. Those items in question were cleared from inventory. No active chain of custody. No viable basis for disciplinary action. Aldridge absorbed this. Even setting aside the equipment, he said, there's the matter of professional history. A litigious background creates institutional risk. Say his name, Dominique said. A beat. I beg your pardon. You've been in this building for 2 weeks, and I have not once heard you refer to Marcus Webb as a person. Her voice stayed level, below raised. Something more precise than raised.
His name is Marcus Webb. He is 42 years old. He is a single father raising a daughter on his own. He is one of the most gifted systems of architects I have encountered
In 15 years in this industry. She held Aldridge's gaze, and she spent 5 years ensuring the industry didn't know he existed. Because he tried to protect patients from a software error, and it was inconvenient for your timeline. Aldridge's face did not change, but something behind it did. He opened his mouth. The door opened first. Everyone turned. Devon stood in the doorway. Behind him, a young man, 23 years old, a slight wearing a Shaban shirt that suggested he had dressed carefully for this. Seth Justin was working harder than he looked to stay steady. Devon said, I apologize for the interruption. This couldn't wait. The young man stepped forward. He had a drive in his hand. My name is Darius Beaumont, he said. My mother's Gloria Beaumont. She runs the Southside Community Resource Center. He looked at the table, at Aldridge specifically, then looked at Dominique instead, which was a decision that took something. Marcus Webb taught me to code when I was 16. I had a cracked laptop and no Wi-Fi at home, and he let me slate for every Friday for 2 years. He set the hard drive on the table. I've been holding on to this for 5 years. I didn't know exactly when the right moment was. A pause. Often found 10 formals. Internal empirical chorus. 2018 and international 1990. Charting between Raymond Aldridge and the engineering team lead. Specific. Dated. The kind of documentation that doesn't leave room for interpretation. The defect in the medication module had been identified 6 months before launch. Not by Marka first. By the engineering team, who reported it up the chain to Aldridge, who responded in writing. 11 words. We are not delaying this launch. Find a workaround or move on. They moved on. Marba said device got a bit in play 4 months later. Running his own stress tests during a late-night session, found the defect, traced it back through the documentation, found the email chain and understood immediately what it meant and what it could do to a patient in a busy hospital at 2 a.m. when the system was running at capacity. He reported it, internally, 3 times, each time with full documentation, each time with a proposed solution, each time with a timeline that would push the launch back 6 weeks. Aldridge told him it was within acceptable parameters. Marcus escalated to the board, and in 72 hours he was gone. The emails continued after that. The software launched on schedule into 14 hospital networks. And in the 18 months that followed, 3 incidents were documented internally. Patients affected by dosage errors during peak system load. 2 required extended hospitalization. 1 required ICU intervention for 4 days. All 3 had been managed quietly, settled quietly, never publicly attributed to the software. Never connected in any external report to the defect Marcus Webb had tried to stop, because Raymond Aldridge had a communications team that was very good at managing quietly. And Marcus Webb was no longer there to say a word. Devon had printed a summary. It moved around the table in silence. Aldridge watched it go. He said nothing for a long time then. Those documents were obtained from proprietary company systems during an unauthorized. I worked there, Darius said. Simply, no heat in it, just fact. Intern. Summer of 2019. I found them during a data audit 2 weeks before Marcus was fired. I kept copies because I was 19 years old and I didn't know what else to do with the truth except hold on to it. He looked at Aldridge directly now, steadier than before. Marcus never told me to do that. He didn't even know I had them. He just taught me that the truth doesn't disappear. It waits. And that someone should just always be with and keep sniffing to its need. The room held that. Raymond Aldridge looked at the summary in front of him, then at the hard drive, then at the faces around the table that were no longer arranged the way they'd been when he arrived. He stood up, picked up his jacket from the back of his chair, folded it over his arm with the careful precision of a man who will not let a room see him rattled. Said something quite deliberate that nobody else could hear. Walked out. Just closed. I'll start the regulatory filing today, Dominique said. Thank you, Lynn. Then she looked at Darius, who was hailing slowly. The specific exhale of someone who held on sank for 5 years and has just finally put it down. Your mother raised someone remarkable, she said. Darius looked at the table, then back up. Marcus Webb. Helped Aldridge's name from the Advisory Council noon. The filing went to the Department of Health and Human Services the following Monday. What happened after that belonged to a longer story and a different reckoning. But it happened, and it was real. And the 3 patients who had never known why they spent extra days in his hospital bed would never know this either. But someone knew, and someone had finally done something with the dying. That had to be enough. There was Marcus from the parking garage, standing between her car and a concrete pillar because the parking garage had become improbably the place where she made her most important phone calls, which was not what parking garages were designed for. But she'd stopped expecting life to conform to design intent sometime around the 46-hour mark 11 days ago. He picked up on the second ring. It's done, she said. A pause that lasted exactly as long as it needed to.
Darius came, she said.
Had the documentation. The board saw everything. She didn't breathe steady. The way Marcus breathed, like that too was something he decided to be in control of. Is he all right? Marcus said. First thing. Not what happened to Aldridge. Not what does this mean for me. Not any of the dozen things she would have asked in his position without thinking twice. Is he all right? He's fine, she said. He was as remarkable, actually, as sound on the other end. Brief, controlled quickly, but real. Marcus said, that kid has been remarkable since he was 16. The all-hands meeting happened the following Wednesday. Dominique had not done one before, not a real one. She'd addressed the company on launches and quarterly results, but that was performance. Carefully managed information moving in one direction. This was something else. This was a room full of people she was going to tell the truth to, and then ask to reckon with what it meant.
The atrium of Nexus Technologies held everyone when all the final floors came down.
General Lester, everyone and one man in a maintenance uniform standing in the far back corner. Because Marcus had come from his shift. Because that was Marcus. Did not arrange his schedule around the expectations of rooms he hadn't been invited into yet. Dominique saw him the moment she stepped to the front. She'd been looking. She began the way she always began things. Without warm-up. Without the throat clearing that some leaders use to ease people toward difficult truths. 6 months ago, she said, I watched a man on a security camera and built a theory about him that was wrong in every direction that mattered. The chair settled into the particular quiet of a large group of people, deciding simultaneously to pay attention. I thought he was a threat to this company. What he was actually doing was keeping this building functional and running a technology education program for young people in Southside on his own time. With equipment this company had written off as worthless. She could feel the room recalibrating.
Good. His name is Marcus Webb.
Some of you know him. Most of you don't. And the fact that most of you don't is exactly what I want to talk about today. She told them the shape of it. Not every private detail, but enough, the patents, empirical. The decision Marcus made when he found that and he paid for making it. The 5 years, the blacklist, the 46 hours that saved their launch. Kids at Southside who had laptops and futures they wouldn't have had otherwise, because Marcus Webb spent his Friday nights building from the pieces the industry had thrown away, including himself. She told them what she'd seen through that window on a Friday night in March when she'd followed a man she suspected of stealing and found him teaching algebra-level systems architecture to teenagers who were writing it all down. She told them what it had taken her to see it, and what it said about her that it had taken that long. She was not comfortable saying that part. She said it anyway. We walk past people every day, she said. In this building, in every building. And we have built very sophisticated systems for not seeing them, for deciding in advance what a person is capable of based on what they're carrying, what floor they're assigned to, what they're wearing when they come through the door. She paused. Marcus Webb has been in this building for 4 years. He holds more patents than most of the people in this room. Identify for architecture by the time it takes most people to read the error message. And he built something in Southside that this company, with all its resources and all its stated values, did not build, did not think to build. She looked toward the back. Marcos, come up here. The walk from the back of the atrium to the front was not a long walk. 40 feet, maybe less. But for 400 people turned to watch it, and Marcus Webb walked through them in a maintenance uniform he'd come straight from work in. Not hurrying, not performing anything, not looking at the ground, not looking at the faces watching him either. Just moving forward with the unhurried certainty of someone who has known who he was for a long time, and stopped quiring other people to confirm it. He stopped beside Dominique. She looked at him directly, not at the room, at him. On behalf of this company, she says, I'm sorry it took this long for anyone here to look at you properly. That's on us. That's on me specifically. Marcus said nothing. His jaw shifted once. She turned back to the room. I'm offering Marcus a position today. Senior systems architect. She looked at him. He shook his head. One small motion. Definite. She moved without pausing. 2 seconds, maximum. Director of Community Technology.
Text will form a task for the community research centers.
Funding, equipment, curriculum development. A direct intern pipeline into this company, and we will open 4 additional centers over the next 2 years. She looked at him. With you leading the initiative. The atrium went wide enough that the ventilation system was audible. Marcus looked at her. She looked back. And something moved across his face that she hadn't seen before. Not the careful blankness. Not the controlled reserve. Something that had been kept behind both of those for a long time and was only now finding a room wide enough and safe enough to exist in. Yes, he said. The atrium exhaled as one. 6 months is both a long time and no time at all, depending on what you're measuring and where you started. The Southside Technology and Community Development Center opened on a Saturday in October. Atlanta in October remembers it has seasons, and the air that morning was the kind sharp and clean that makes people feel like things are genuinely possible. Not just imaginable, actually possible. The building was real now. Not the resource center with the water-stained ceiling tiles and the furniture held together by collective sadness. A real building, renovated properly. Equipment in rooms with good lighting and chairs the right size and whiteboards that erased cleanly. A computer lab that could run 24 workstations simultaneously without the electrical system registering an objections. A kitchen where you could make food for students who sometimes arrived without having eaten. And the people, students who had been in Marcus's classes for years, count job offers and offer letters in their pockets, standing in the space where they'd first learned that they were allowed to want those things. Parents who to work 2 and knee jobs and still showed up on Saturdays because they understood that this was worth showing up for. Nexus engineers who had started coming Tuesday evenings 3 months ago and kept coming because something someday kill feel like they meant something beyond a sprint cycle. Jordan Carter, 10 years old, wearing a Nexus Junior volunteer badge, he had lobbied Dominique for extensively over 2 separate dinner conversations. Just a 7-year-old named Kim, how to create a folder structure on a refurbished laptop. Zoe Webb, 8 years old, deeply committed to the view that Keon's folder structure could be better, and provoked this needs fit me without being asked. Gloria moving through the space with the expression of a woman who has been carrying a vision for a long time and is now standing inside it, and finding that it is larger than she imagined, which is the best outcome for a vision. Dominique in the entrance, not managing anything, not calculating anything, just watching, which was newer than it should have been. Mark was not at the center of it, and never at the center, always slightly to the side, kneeling beside someone who needed help, moving between stations, listening more than talking, present in the way that present when they are exactly where they're supposed to be and know it. Gloria called for attention at 2 p.m. The room gathered the way. Rooms gather when the person calling for attention has earned it over decades rather than demanded it. She said things about the center, about the neighborhood and the families in it, about what it meant to have an organization stand alongside them with intention rather than charity, about the difference between being helped and being seen. Then she said, "Is there someone this doesn't happen without?" She didn't explain. The room already knew. Anyone coming to Southside for more than a week already knew exactly who she meant. He's been asked to accept various forms of recognition today, Gloria continued. He has declined all of them except one. Because the students may something he couldn't say no to. And I've known Marcus Webb for 3 years. He can say no to almost anything. She nodded toward the back of the room. A group came forward, 12 of them. The youngest maybe 9, sneakers lighting up with each step. The oldest Azarias Bubomont, 23, in the same button down from the boardroom, pressed again. They were carrying something between them. A piece of wood, 2 feet by 1 foot. Sanded smooth by hands that had learned how to sand in this building. Letters applied in paint that had been chosen carefully from the supply closet. Multiple hands, multiple sessions. The beautiful irregular result of many people caring deeply about a single outcome. For the man who saw what we could become before we knew ourselves. Marcus took it with both hands, looked at it, and the room watched something happen that none of them would quite be able to describe accurately afterward. Because the words for it were all slightly insufficient. He didn't cry the way crying looks in the movies. No single dramatic moment, no heaving. No performance of grief or relief or gratitude. Just a man holding a piece of wood with letters on it. Standing in a room full of people he had shown up for on Friday nights when he could have been home, when he was tired,
When his dog was being,
when the world had given him every legitimate reason to stop showing up.
and his face was just doing something quiet and irrevocable.
Something he had carried out for fashion for so long that the release of it was almost visible.
Almost.
Zoe saw it. 8 years old, 3 rows back. She was out of her chair before anyone else had registered what was happening. Small arms around her father from behind, face pressed between his shoulder blades. Not saying anything because she was, and she understood instinctively that this was not a moment for words. Marcus branched back one round and without looking. Helena. Carter, watching from beside his mother, reached sideways without blinking and took Dominique's hand. She held on too. Gloria waited for the room to find itself again. She was good at waiting. She had been waiting for things her whole life, and had learned that the waiting was part of the work. When the room was ready, she said, "There's one more thing. I've been deciding when to say it, and I decided today is the day." The people gathered. In the past 3 years, 11 students from this program have obtained employment in technology. 11 from this room, from these computers, from Friday evenings and Saturday mornings, and Marcus Webb believing before they did that they were worth the mint of his time. A quiet settled that was different from the quiet before, fuller, heavier in a good way. 3 of those 11 are here today. 3 hands went up around the room, different ages, different companies. Same center, same teachers, framing dice that had changed the direction of their lives. And one of them, Gloria said, looking at Darius, stood in a boardroom last Friday and told a truth he had been keeping safe for 5 years. Because Marcus Webb taught him that the truth is worth keeping. That someone has to be willing to hold it until the right moment. She paused. What Marcus planted came back to protect him. That is not coincidence. That is what happens when you invest in people without conditions. Without expecting anything back, without needing anyone to see it. She looked at Marcus. He never needed anyone to see it, she said. He just kept going. The applause that followed was not the polished kind, not the boardroom kind, the real kind. From people who meant it with their hands and their feet, and the particular noise people make when something true has been said in their presence. After. The celebration moved into the evening.
Food appeared the way food appears is when multiple communities tribute singers and multi-slayers. And music is a form of a charge of portions.
Music from a speaker someone had brought.
Children running the perimeter at a pace that suggested they had been saving this energy all day. Engineers talking to parents.
Former students talking to current ones. The particular alchemy of a shared space that has decided it belongs to everyone. Dominique found a quiet moment at the edge of it, not managing. Not assessing ROI or brand positioning, or any of the 1,000 calculations that usually occupied whatever mental space wasn't actively running a meeting. Just standing there, watching her son show a younger kid something on a screen, watching Zoe disagree with whatever Jordan was showing, watching Gloria laugh at something with a group of parents near the kitchen door. Marcus came and stood beside her. He quietly enough that she heard him a half-second after he arrived, which she had stopped finding unsettling somewhere around the 3rd month. "You should be in the middle of this," she said. "I was." He looked at the room. "I needed a minute." They stood together. Not to call, which had become its own thing between them. A comfort that didn't require filling. Jordan was pointing at the screen. Zoe was pointing at Jordan. The gesture suggested a technical disagreement of some intensity. "She's going to win that argument," Dominique said. "She always does," Marcus said. The pride in it was quiet but total. Dominique turned toward him slightly. Can I ask you something? You can ask. The note you left on my desk. She looked at the room, not at him. Some fights aren't worth having twice. When you wrote that, were you done? Were you actually going to leave and not look back? He was quiet for a moment, the real kind of quiet. Not deflecting, actually sitting with the question. I was done fight-hunting the version of it I've before, he said finally, where it's just me, making it for myself, against people who've already decided. He paused. I've done it. I know what it costs. I know what it buys. He looked at the room. At Darius across the space, someone relaxed now in a way he hadn't been a week ago. But this wasn't that version. How did you know? Because you drove to Southside at 8 p.m. on a weeknight and sat in a chair that was too small for you and told me you were sorry before you had a plan. He glanced at her sideways. People with plans don't do that. Dominique looked at her shoes, which were still the wrong shoes for this neighborhood, which she had started to think of as a feature rather than a miscalculation. I didn't have a plan, she confirmed. I know. I just knew I wasn't going to let it end the way it was heading. I know that too. He looked back at the room. That's why I stayed. The evening wound down, gradually, without a clean ending. The way evenings do, where the thing and the end of the thing blend into each other and you only realize it's over when the room is quiet and the chairs are being stacked. Jordan had fallen entirely asleep in a chair in the corner. His body had simply decided mid-thought that consciousness was no longer required and executed the decision efficiently. Zodie was technically awake, but operating with the specific diminished capacity of a person who's 8 years old and has been social for 4 hours longer than 8-year-olds are designed for. She had acquired a second piece of cake at some point and was holding the plate with the grip of someone who has priorities even in a compromised state. Marcus picked her up. She rearranged herself against his shoulder without opening her eyes. The cake plate remained in her hand with the conviction of someone who would find it in the morning and consider it a victory. Dominique woke Jordan gently. He blinked, took in the room. Said, "Is the cake gone?" before he was fully present in the world. "There's cake at home," she said. He assessed this claim, decided to accept it. Got out the parking lot and was quiet and calm. Later in October, doing what it does. The kind of evening settles on you like something deliberate, like the day deciding to end well. Cars stood 2 spaces apart. Her sedan, his Honda. The same Honda she'd got followed on a Friday night 6 months ago, looking for a corporate spy. Marcus buckled Zoe into the back seat. She didn't stir. The cake plate made it in with her. Jordan climbed into Dominique's car and was asleep again within 30 seconds, with the reliability of a person who has decided the world is fine and no longer requires his input. Marcus closed Zoe's door softly, stood up, turned. Dominique was leaning against her car, not in a hurry, which was its own thing. "Tuesday," she said. "We need to start the conversation about the second location. I have thoughts. I know you do. A lot of thoughts. I have a 9 a.m., but I can move it. You don't have to move it. I want to move it." He looked at her for a moment, not weighing her. Stopped doing that somewhere in the last 6 months. What he was doing was something quieter. Just looking. The way you look at something you have decided is worth looking at carefully. "I'll see you Tuesday," he said. "You will." He got in the Honda. She stood in the parking lot until his taillights reached the corner. He got in her own car. Without starting the engine. Through the windshield she could see the center's entrance. The new sign above the door catching the streetlight. Southside Technology and Community Development Center. And below it, smaller, built for second chances. She thought about the first time she'd seen this building, through a car window, engine running. Telling herself it was conducting surveillance. Telling herself this was professional. Telling herself the man inside was a threat. But the boy in the red hoodie holding a laptop like it was the most important thing he'd ever been handed, because it was. She thought about Marcus standing at a whiteboard with both hands moving, mapping connections between systems for 15 teenagers who were writing everything down because they could feel mad even before they fully understood why. She thought about Jordan taking her hand in the atrium without knowing why, except that the moment called for it. She started the engine, took the long way home, through Southside. She'd been doing that lately, taking the longer road back, through streets that Jordan was starting to recognize from Saturdays spent here, through the neighborhood that was not her neighborhood and had never been, past the center, which was dark now except for the sign above the door. She slowed as she passed it, built for second chances. She thought about all the things that phrased it to hold. A company that had built its success on a foundation it never acknowledged. A man who had been invisible and showed every single day to keep building anyway. A girl who lost her mother at 3 and grew up watching her father show up for her other people's children with the same constancy he showed up for her. A boy who had a hard drive for 5 years because his teacher told him the truth was worth keeping. A woman who followed a janitor into the dark and found entirely against her intentions that she was the one who needed to see where he was going. Second chances did announce themselves. They didn't arrive with a clear label. They came disguised as security footage, as wrong shoes on a cracked sidewalk, as a classroom window in a neighborhood you'd never had reason to visit. You had to be paying attention. You had to be willing to look. Dominique pulled away from the curb. The sign stayed lit behind her as she drove. For the students who would come Monday morning. For the parents who would drop them off and go to their second jobs and trust that something real was happening skiing inside. And for everyone who had been told in one way or another that the door was not for them. The sign said otherwise. Someone had believed it was worth building before any of them arrived to use it, and left the light on. They could find their way in.